I cut off the end of the song a pinch too early because I had to kind of play it by ear. Um, but yeah, I went old school Ministry. The mind is a terrible thing to taste. I believe this was the first Ministry album that went industrial metal. I think everything else he was doing before then was somewhere in like goth rock territory, and then he kind of made the flip over. I don't even know if it was even a goth thing. He was kind of like maybe like dark wave, like new wave, but like a little bit on the mysterious side, something like that. I just remember seeing all this old stuff with Ministry. But anyway, how's it going, guys? Welcome to the show. So I'm being lazy, and we're just gonna run through for each break the Ministry albums. It's 16 pages tonight, so effectively I'm gonna do 5 pages a piece. One of them is gonna be 6. All right. So that means I'll probably do a little bit of bleed over to make it work. Anyway, I should be working again on Monday, which is going to be great. It'll be a major question of exactly which job I'm doing. I'm kind of excited because I've got something definite that I don't like as much as the hope of being selected in the interview for this thing coming up, which will be a much more rewarding endeavor. Okay. Let me see here. Yes. So now we are arrived at Antonia. Captured and Destroyed. Chapter 20. Which, didn't I say this was part 20? This needs to be part 21. Excuse me. They're not supposed to. It's supposed to be one ahead of the chapter because of the because I did all introductions for part 1, so everything's just a chapter off. Which maybe I'll fix that, and I'll maybe be like preludes and then chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Maybe I'll go back and do that. But anyway, Antonia captured and destroyed. As the days wore on, the plight of Jerusalem grew steadily worse. The partisans being goaded to greater fury by successive calamities, while the famine that devoured the people now preyed on themselves. The innumerable corpses piled up all over the city not merely were a revolting sight and emitted a pestilential stench, they obstructed the fighting men as they made their sorties. For like men marching across a battlefield littered with thousands of dead, they were forced to trample on the bodies. But as they trod them underfoot, they gave no shudder, felt no pity, and saw no ill omen to themselves in this insult to the departed. Their hands drenched with their country's blood, they rushed out to battle with foreigners, reproaching the Almighty, it seems to me, for his slowness in punishing them. For it was not hope of victory, but despair of deliverance now that emboldened them for the fight. The Romans, though it was a terrible struggle to collect the timber, raised their platforms in 21 days, having, as described before, stripped the whole area in a circle round the town to a distance of 10 miles. The countryside, like the city, was a pitiful sight, for where once there had been a lovely vista of woods and parks, there now was nothing but desert and the stumps of trees. No one, not even a foreigner, who had seen the old Judea and the glorious suburbs of the city, and now set eyes on her present desolation, could have helped sighing and groaning at so terrible a change, for every trace of beauty had been blotted out by the war, and nobody who had known it in the past and came upon it suddenly would have recognized the place. When he was already there, he would still have been looking for the city. So there's a implication that this was ancestral masterwork architecture infrastructure. The war destroyed it, and they are never going to be able to make it what it was again. And it's been very well explained, the manner in which the Jews are losing these things because they're not surrendering. They're not, like, to me, it's a portrayal of they're not in self-preservation mindset. They are, they've made themselves into these vicious animals to be served to the god of war. Their frenzy being their willing sacrifice. To Romans and Jews alike, the completion of the platforms brought a new terror. The Jews felt sure that unless they burnt these two, the city would fall. The Romans, that it would never be taken if they went the way of the others, for no more timber was available, and the soldiers' physical strength had been sapped by soil, their morale by constant reverses. Indeed, the disastrous conditions in the city proved more discouraging to the Romans than to the inhabitants. They found the fighting men not in the least subdued by their severe reverses. While their own hopes were continually frustrated, their platform rendered useless by stratagems, their engines by the strength of the wall, their skill in close combat by the daring of their adversaries. Worst blow of all, they discovered that the Jews had an inner courage that rose superior to faction, famine, war, and disasters beyond number. They began to think the onslaughts of these men irresistible, and their equanimity amidst disasters unshakable. What would they not endure if fortune favored them, seeing that calamity only whetted their appetite for battle? Right? So this is the, this is the die-hard, last man standing kind of ethos, right? They're willing to take on the mythos of the last man standing for this purpose, to forge it to their identity, because they can't see life without it, or they'll never believe that their God would forgive them for whatever their sense of divine purpose is. Which, what you have to understand, if you're that zealous, if you were to win, you'd be using that in arrogance. The tyrants always do. Their divine ability to conquer in such a manner, to drive the Roman sympathizer out, and to make anybody who wasn't a diehard like you, if you were the one so to survive, and sometimes we root for that guy because of their, we see that they are of character and are of good men. Now we are to believe how things have been established by Josephus as to the character of these men, because hey, this is how these men are in their fighting character. But that's just a commentary on their fighting character, right? That's great. Congratulations. Muhammad's really good at fighting. That doesn't mean I've got to like Muhammad now. Right? Anyway, John's forces in Antonia were building up their strength for eventualities, in case the wall was thrown down. At the same time, they forestalled the onslaught of the Rams by an assault on the Roman works. The attempt was a failure. They advanced torch in hand, but before nearing the platform, lost hope completely and turned back in the first place. They seemed to be no agreed plan. They dashed out a few at a time at intervals with hesitation and fear. In short, unlike Jews, there was little sign of the national characteristics, boldness, dash, the massed charge, the refusal to acknowledge defeat. But while the customary vigor was lacking in their advance, they found the Romans formed up in unusual strength with their mail-clad bodies. They surrounded the platforms with so complete a bulwark as to leave no chink anywhere for the passage of a firebrand, and every man braced himself to die rather than budge from his post. For, apart from the destruction of all their hopes, if these works too went up in flames, the soldiers could not bear the thought that trickery should triumph every time over prowess. Desperation over skill at arms, numbers over, hey, what's up, Lucy Rose up? Numbers over experience, and Jews over Romans. Furthermore, the artillery cooperated by dropping missiles on the leading Jewish files. The fallen held up those immediately behind, and the risk of going to the fore quenched their ardor. Of those who pushed beyond the beaten zone, some before coming to close quarters took fright at the disciplined and serried ranks of the enemy. Others took to flight only when pricked by their lances. At last, flinging the word coward at each other, they withdrew with nothing to show. It was on the 1st of Panemos that the attempt was made. After the Jewish withdrawal, the Romans brought up the batterers, pelted with lumps of rock from Antonia, with firebrands, arrows, and every weapon with which necessity furnished the Jews. For though they felt sure of their wall and despised the engines, they nevertheless tried to prevent them from being brought up. The Romans, assuming that the anxiety of the Jews to avert an assault on Antonia was due to the weakness of the wall, and hoping that the foundations were unsound, made strenuous counter-efforts. The wall stood up to the blows, but the Romans, under a deluge of missiles, paid no heed to any danger from above and kept the batterers constantly at work. Estonia. Interesting. But that's pretty far up north, ain't it? Why would they drag, this is Roman legions on foot. We don't have iron horses yet. There's no iron horse in this world. It's not even airships, allegedly. The Romans, assuming the anxiety of the Jews to avert an assault on Antonia was due to the weakness of the wall. Oh, wait, hold on. Did I read all that? Okay, the wall stood up to the blows, but the Romans, under a deluge of missiles... Okay, constantly at work. Sorry, see, you threw me off, but that was a good comment. As, however, they were awkwardly placed and crushed by the lumps of rocks, other men working under a roof of shields strove with hands and crowbars to undermine the foundation, and by strenuous efforts levered out 4 stones. Darkness ended the activities of both sides, but in the night, at the point where by measures he had devised against the earlier platforms. John had undermined the wall, the tunnel fell in, and the wall, already shaken by the rams, suddenly collapsed. Now, also, here's another thing with the Estonia thing that you brought up, Lucy. It is a wildly known, like, you go to any state in America, and you go to some Christian countries, you're gonna fucking see places named after places in the Bible. You know, you're going to find a Nineveh somewhere. There's a Palestine in Ohio, which was part of a psyop that happened a few years ago. You know, here in Connecticut, there's a fucking Bethlehem at the very least. Right? There's also a Valhalla, New York. So at least we got that going for us. But yeah, no, a lot of Christians do this. They name the town after places in the mythology, right? Because there's a lot of that in the Bible where all sorts of stories happen in particular cities, in particular countries or whatnot, right? And so they name them after that, right? You know, it's entirely possible that events happened in France the way some people say things happened. That the events of the Gospels happened in France, and that they just then transplanted that mythology to the Palestinian era shortly before the events of this book that I'm reading. That's one conspiracy theory that's out there, right? You know, is that, you know, that the Gospels happened in France. Like, that's like a real, like, thing. Like, it makes a lot of interesting correlations, but it could just simply be from the fact that everybody's naming all the places after everything. So it's like Springfield. It's Springfield, New York, Springfield, Pennsylvania, Springfield, Ohio, Springfield, California. There's a Springfield in like every fucking state, right? And if you're anywhere near Springfield, you've got Simpsons on the fucking mind one way or the other. Because they made the mythos of Springfield in America The Simpsons. So anyway, yeah. So just go type in any biblical location that exists, like a Bethlehem, like a Babylon or whatever, and then type in a state and see if it pops up. Try a couple of states, you know, Bible Belt regions in particular, New England in particular. Anyway, this occurrence had an astonishing effect on both sides. The Jews, who might have been expected to lose heart because the collapse was unlooked for and they were unprepared for it, took it quite calmly as Antonia remained. But the Romans, unlooked for delight at the downfall, was quickly extinguished by the sight of another wall which John's men had built just behind. Certainly this one appeared easier to assail than the other. To climb up over the ruins seemed a simple matter, and it was assumed that the wall was much weaker than that of Antonia, and that as it had been erected in an emergency, it would quickly disintegrate. However, no one dared to climb up. For those who led the way, it meant certain death. Believing that zest for battle is roused most effectively by words of encouragement, and the incentives and promises often make men oblivious of danger, sometimes contemptuous of death itself, Titus got together the elite of his army and put them to the test. Now remember, this is nothing like the character of people that we have called Jews in 1930s, 1940s Europe, right? You had too many of them that were not fighters. If this was really Jewish particular people. For all we know, those people were not Jews, but the media was told that they were Jews because maybe the Germans were targeting gypsies or something. They finally got the gypsies somehow, and maybe that's something like, because the gypsies are also Jewish, by the way. You know, they're probably the closest thing to pagan Jewish that you can look for. And they're pretty they're notoriously like I think they got a lot of like I think they just have like a bandit-esque culture to them. Like, I think it's just like, it's kind of like in their psychology of like ripping off a guy, right? You know, and as long as you really are a gypsy, you can kind of do that, because you're not like what these guys do in the corporate suit, which is not gypsy, and they're ripping you off, right? You know, the gypsies may be connected to all sorts of people that were mythologically archetyped as magic folk, like goblins. I'm sorry, but I am telling you something that I think, would happen, because it's fucking honest. It's, the context of the humor fucking matters. Because that's how it is with anybody who's strangers to anybody, right? You get a fuzzy focal idea, right? Because you're going to see it in their body language and other things. But anyway, my fellow soldiers, he began to urge men on to actions involving no risk, is a deliberate insult to them and an unmistakable proof of the speaker's cowardice. Incentives surely are needed only for dangerous enterprises. The other sort men will undertake without any inducement. So I tell you here and now that the ascent to this wall is a formidable task. The point I would emphasize is that the first duty of those who pride themselves on their courage is to battle with difficulties, that it is a splendid thing to die with honor, and that the heroism of those who lead the way will be amply rewarded in the first place. What might well be a deterrent to some should be an incentive to you. The endurance of those Jews and their fortitude in distress. It would be scandalous for men who are Romans, and my soldiers in peacetime trained for war, in war accustomed to triumph, to be outshone by Jews in strength or determination, and that on the brink of victory with God to assist us. Right? So it's just like, all right, guys, these guys got a lot more fucking kick in them than we thought, and in short, you're embarrassing the fucking empire. So some of you are going to have to die. All right, have at it. All right, this is the fate of the order follower. You see. So for our setbacks are the result of Jewish desperation. Their difficulties are increased both by your prowess and by God's assistance. Faction, hunger, siege, walls that fall when no engine is at work. What else can be the cause but God's anger with them and aid to ourselves? So, to be outdone by our inferiors and to betray God, our ally, as well, would be unworthy of us. Oh, and by the way, I started listening to some older Gnostic informant episodes that get into discussions about Josephus in general, some of which covering the Jewish War. I would recommend that. I enjoy Gnostic informants' work. It would be utterly disgraceful that Jews whose reputation suffers little from defeat as they have learnt to endure slavery should, in order to escape from it, despise death and repeatedly sally out against our full strength, not in the hope of victory, but merely to prove their courage, while you, the lords of almost every land and sea, who could not hold up your heads if victory escaped you, never once hazarded a direct encounter with the enemy, but waited for starvation or bad luck to bring them to their knees, while you sat idle, with such weapons in your hands, and that when at a trifling hazard you could win a resounding victory. So it's kind of like, it's just like you're letting the easy win of starvation like entice you out of like an honorable fight, right? You know, it's just like he doesn't want to fight. It's just like, just let him fucking starve, right? You know, it's technically the lesser of two evils, right? Because you know, just like, because you're being forced to kind of push the ethos. You're trying to push some level of human morality that's in there, right? You're trying to force it in a dark way. See what I just did right there? Dark side of the force, right? You know, to, come on. Don't you want to kill a guy who's starving to death? Doesn't that sound like fun for God? Anyway, it would be utterly disgraceful that Jews, whose reputation suffers little from defeat as they have learnt to endure slavery, should, in order to escape from it, despite death, and repeatedly sally out against our full strength, not in the hope of victory, but merely to prove their courage, while you, the lords of almost every land and sea, who could not hold up your heads if victory escaped you, never once hazarded a direct encounter with the enemy, but waited for starvation or bad luck to bring them to their knees, while you sat idle with such weapons in your hands, and that when at a trifling hazard you could win a resounding victory, once on top of Antonia, and the city is at our mercy. For even if there is some further fighting against the men inside, I do not anticipate any. We shall be sitting on top, squeezing the breath out of them, and that means victory, speedy and complete. I have no intention at this moment of singing the praises of death in battle, and the immortality given to those who are killed when fighting mad. Okay, that's kind of fun. Okay, so so guys, don't think about the way you fight gloriously to go to Valhalla. Don't think about it. Now go to war. That's what he just did. He just did. He's just like, oh, and let me not remind you, and then once you say it, you're reminding them. Forked tongue. But we take this as whatever, right? So typically when we are actually going to at least mention it, which is to remind it, we mean it like sarcastically, right? We're saying like, I am saying it only because I'm assuming that it didn't need to be said. To remind people that there's an unspoken, everybody better be doing it, because we're a little bit worried about your resolve and remembering your oath. Right? It's all this stuff. All right? So, as for those who are not made the way, curse them. I hope they will die in a bed of disease, condemned body and the soul to the grave. Whew. Of course. Of course. Yes. Punish them for starving them to death instead of slaughtering them. Slaughtering them is actually rewardable or something. Right? This is so this is a glimpse at Roman morality. Right? Here's Roman morality. They can go home and they can tell their mothers this story. Right? That's the idea. Right? It was, we would not let them embarrass Rome. Yada, yada, yada. All that stuff. It's patriotism. It's patriotism. This is how patriotism works. This is the narratives. This is the rhetoric of Roman patriotism. If this is indeed a conversation that happened. As for those who are not made that way, curse them. Oh, yes. Okay, so anyway. For every good soldier knows that souls set free from the flesh on the battlefield by the sword are given a welcome by the purest element, ether and set among the stars, and that as friendly spirits and genial heroes they appear to their own descendants. Right? Right? See, exactly. Exactly. This is Roman war glory. This is, this is the prize for serving Mars well. Or Mithras, or whoever the fuck you're serving at this period in the very complicated time of Roman paganism. Like Mithras being a big deal, right? But was this Mithraic morality, right? I suppose if Mithraism wasn't involved in something, then they may have had a good rationale. I don't know, right? So anyway, while souls that waste away in sick bodies, even if completely free from spots and stains, vanish into darkness underground and sink deep into oblivion, life, body, and memory too annihilated at one stroke. Whoa. That's a fucking lie. That's a fucking lie. Like, none of these actions, like, even like cowardice and whatever, like, none of those actions are the second death. Right? He just explained the second death. This is when you failed the scales of Amente, and the heart falls into Ammit, and it is devoured. And although you might as well be annihilated, the most true core essence of you is not annihilated. It's more like you're consciously being digested alive by all of the evil that you attach to your soul, till it strips you down to your true core essence, and you're shit out with no karma to start the ascension cycle over again. Here, welcome to Amoebaville. How many cycles of an amoeba do you get to play before you level up? This is why I really love the anime Akira, because Tetsuo, because he crosses over into the psychopath, he does terrible things that, and there you see a very Eastern way of going through the second death. Right? That's what happened. They had to summon the Akira. The Akira had to collapse Tetsuo into a singularity to strip him of everything that was himself until he is a speck of stardust, to start over in consciousness all over again. Because that's the only mercy left for him, because he showed amoeba consciousness and just wanted to absorb everything into his pain. Now, but if it is fated that all men must die, and a kindlier minister of death than any sickness is the sword, how contemptible it would be not to give to the service of our countrymen what we must yield up to fate. I have spoken so far as if those who make the attempt cannot possibly come through alive, but it is possible for those who play the man to come safely through the very greatest dangers. First, the ruined wall will be easy to climb. Then all the new structure will be easy to throw down. More and more of you must call up your courage for the task and give each other encouragement and support. Let me double check something, because I've been reading through this first segment slow, and I'm pretty sure I'm only 4 pages in. Right? Because I start at 325. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I'm on the 5th page now. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I am on the 5th page. Okay, good. Good. All right. Your determination will soon take the heart out of the Jews. Well then, it is quite possible that you... Remember, this is a Jew writing this stuff, too. A Jew that is on the side of the guys that just said that. I mean, is Josephus a George Soros type? Anyway, it is quite possible that you will win a bloodless victory once you take the first step. As you climb, they will presumably try to stop you, but if you once force your way through undetected, there will be no further resistance, even if only a few of you get there. As for the man who takes the lead, I should be ashamed if, when honors are awarded, I did not make him an object to envy. Finally, the survivors shall be promoted over his present equals, and the fallen shall receive the coveted meed of valor. Oh, look at that. They're passing out Odinic mead. Like the mead of valor. Is that... as far as I know, that kind of thing is only a Norse Germanic thing. So that's probably something that was adopted into Roman ranks from those amongst Germania that gave in and were interested in being a part of Rome. You know, such as, such as Germania. Germania did get conquered at one point there. And we can all talk about France. I mean, that's where the Latin language comes in and creates French out of Germanic. Yeah, no, Josephus is very, he just kind of, dumps the course of facts in chronological order in kind of, just a very blocky and direct way. And it's not necessarily overtly, interested in building a scene, right? This is supposed to be nonfiction, right? This is supposed to be his records. This is probably a compilation, of many notes that then got strung together into organized passages and things like that. Because that's probably how you wrote down things. Because he would have been eyewitness to something, and then he would have a scroll nearby and commit it to memory through writing. Which, he has to find a place to fucking, either sit down and write, or maybe he's got a small papyri, like a spy, and he just fucking writes it down like a notepad. I don't know. But the point is that he would have been fucking taking notes in real time, something everybody used to fucking do, is write notes in real time on pen and paper, or pencil and paper. And then you would have those assembled in your notebook, and then you would take your thoughts and organize your notebook, and then begin to novelize the process. Anyway, your determination will soon take the heart of the Jews. It's quite possible that you will win a bloodless victory. Oh, I'm sorry, meed of valor, that's all the way up there. Anyway, listening to the speech, the bulk of the army were appalled by the greatness of the danger. But in one of the cohorts was a man called Sabinus, a Syrian by race, who in prowess and courage proved himself outstanding. And yet anyone who had seen him before would have concluded from his physical appearance that he was not even an average soldier. His skin was black, his flesh lean and shrunken, but in his frail body, far too slender for its own prowess, dwelt a heroic soul. Okay, so we got a scrawny Syrian black guy. Okay. Springing to his feet, he cried, "I gladly offer you my services, Caesar. I am the first to scale the wall. I trust my strength and determination will have the benefit of your usual luck. But if I am thwarted in my efforts, rest assured I am quite prepared for failure, and for your sake have chosen death with my eyes open. All right, so, there he goes. He's committed to dying to be the lead in an assault and so on and so forth. So he's their guy. He's the guy. All right. So, Sabinus, show us what you got. So saying, with his left hand, he held his shield in front of and over his head, and drawing his sword with his right, stepped out towards the wall. Just about midday, he was followed by 11 of the others, the only ones to emulate his courage. But he went on far ahead of them all, driven by some supernatural impulse. Oh boy, he's got the gods behind him, right? It's one of these stories. The guards on the battlements flung spears at him, discharged volleys of arrows from all directions, and rolled down great lumps of rock, which swept away some of the 11. But Sabinus, charging into the missiles and buried under the arrows, did not falter for a moment, till he had got to the top and routed the enemy. For the Jews, astounded by his dynamic energy and remorseless determination, and thinking too that others had climbed up, turned tail, and here one might well complain of fortune, so jealous of heroic deeds and ever ready to prevent brilliant success. For this brave man, just as he achieved his purpose, tripped up and, stumbling over a big stone, fell flat on top of it with a great crash. Ah! The Jews swung round, and seeing him alone on the ground, pelted him from all directions. He got up on one knee, and covering himself with his shield for a time, fought back, wounding many who came near him, but soon, riddled with wounds, he lost the use of his right hand, and at length, before he breathed his last, he was buried under the arrows. So brave a man deserved a better fate, yet his fall was a fitting end to such an enterprise. Of the others, 3 who had already reached the top were battered to death with stones. The other 8 were dragged down, wounded, and carried back to camp. This incident took place on the 3rd of Penemos. 2 days later, 20 of the men guarding the advanced posts on the platform got together, and calling on the standard bearer of the 5th Legion, 2 soldiers from the cavalry squadrons, and 1 trumpeter at 2 a.m., moved forward in silence through the ruins of Antonia. Disposing of the first sentries in their sleep, they got possession of the wall and ordered the trumpeter to sound. The other guards instantly leapt to their feet and ran away without staying to see how many had climbed up for the trumpet call, and the resulting panic deluded them into thinking that the enemy had climbed up en masse. When Caesar heard the signal, he armed his forces with all speed, and with his generals and picked troops led the way to the top. The Jews had taken refuge in the temple, and the Romans poured in through the tunnel. John had dug to the Roman platforms. The partisans of both groups, John's and Simon's, drawn up separately, blocked their way, displaying strength and determination to the very limit. They realized that a Roman entry into the sanctuary would be the beginning of the end, while the Romans saw in it the dawn of victory. Round the entrances they grappled in a life and death struggle, the Romans driving on relentlessly to get possession of the temple, the Jews pushing back towards Antonia. Arrows and spears were of no use to either side. They drew their swords and closed. In the milling mass, it was impossible to distinguish one side from the other, as the men were locked together inextricably in the confined space, and amidst the uproar, their shouts conveyed no meaning to the ear. The carnage on both sides was terrible, and the mail-clad bodies of the fallen were trampled and crushed by the combatants. Whichever way the tide of battle swung, always there followed the cheers of the victors, the groans of the routed. There was room for neither fight nor pursuit in the confused struggle, the turns of the scale, the movements this way and that were infinitesimal. Those in front must either kill or be killed. There could be no retreat, for on either side those behind pressed their own men forward and left no space between the opposing lines. But the time came when Jewish fury got the better of Roman skill, and the line began to give from end to end. After all, they had fought without a break from 2 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, the Jews in full strength and with the danger of utter defeats as a spur to their valor, the Romans with only a tiny part of their army, since the legions those actually fighting counted on had not yet followed them up the slope. So it was sufficient for the present to be in possession of Antonia. Standing by, Titus said in Antonia, let's see, we are at the 6th page finally. So from here, I can take the first break of the show. Hang on a tick. I have to move this here and take care of any ads. Is there going to be an ad? No ads. Good. All right. Okay. Like I said, we're going to keep going on ministry. So All right, there we go. We're back. Bang. So, standing by Titus's side in Antonia was a centurion from Bithynia called Julian, a man of note and far more remarkable for skill in arms, physical strength, and fearless spirit than anyone I met with from beginning to end of the war. When he saw the Romans already giving way and putting up a poor defense, he sprang forward and drove back the already victorious Jews unaided as far as the corner of the inner temple. The whole mass fled, convinced that such strength and audacity could not be those of a mere man. This way and that he charged through their midst as they scattered, killing all he could reach. Never had Caesar beheld so amazing a sight, or the other side one so terrifying. But he too was pursued by fate, from whom there is no escape for mortal man. He was wearing the ordinary military boots studded with masses of sharp nails, and as he ran across the stone pavement, he slipped and fell flat on his back, his armor clanging so loudly that the runaways turned to look. A shout went up from the Romans in Antonia, alarmed from their champion's safety, while the Jews crowded round him and aimed blows from all directions with their lances and broadswords. Many heavy blows he stopped with his shield. Time after time he tried to stand up, but was knocked down by the mass of assailants. Even then, as he lay, he stabbed many with his sword, for he could not be finished off easily, as he was protected in every vital part by helmet, breastplate, and kept his head down. But at last, when all his limbs were slashed and no one dared come to his aid, he ceased to struggle. Caesar was greatly distressed at the death of so gallant a soldier, killed before so many eyes. He himself was prevented by his situation from going to the rescue, though anxious to do so. Yeah. That's the thing. Wait, we're talking about Vespasian, right? Vespasian was anxious to get in there. Vespasian, who sounds like he's had quite a few stuck pigs at dinner. So, those who might have gone were too terrified. So Julian, after a long fight for life in which he allowed few of his assailants to go unscathed, at long last received the coup de grace, leaving behind him not only with Caesar but even with his foes a glorious reputation. The Jews snatched the body and again drove the Romans back, shutting them up in Antonia. Those on their side who distinguished themselves in the battle were Alexis and Gryphaeus, among John's followers, among Simon's Malachias, Judas son of Merto, and Jacob son of Sosas, commanding the Idumeans and the Zealots, 2 brothers, sons of Jairus, by name Simon and Judas. Titus ordered the soldiers with him to lay Antonia flat and make the ascent easy for the whole army. Then he put up Josephus to speak, for he was informed that on that day, the 17th of Panemos, through lack of men, the continual sacrifice had been continued, and that the people were consequently in the depths of despair. Josephus was to make John the same offer as before if he was possessed by some morbid craving for a fight. He was free to come out with as many men as he liked and join battle without at the same time bringing destruction on the city and sanctuary. But he must stop polluting the holy place and offending against God. Moreover, he was permitted to choose any Jews he liked to offer the discontinued sacrifices. Josephus took his stand where he could be heard, not only by John, but by the masses, and delivered Caesar's message in Aramaic, appealing to them eloquently to spare their birthplace, to beat out the flames already enveloping the sanctuary, and to restore to God the due oblations. Listening to him, the people remained silent and dejected, but the chief gangster poured abuse and curses on the head of Josephus, finally, adding that he would never be afraid of capture, as the city was God's. Josephus loudly retorted. Well, no, well, I mean, well, yes, but not, like, but these aren't foreigners. The Romans are the foreigners. There's no question about this. All right? Now, if we are talking about things that predate this, are making it much clearer that the various different kinds of Jews that got split out from here, that maybe some of them were foreigners, right? There's some deeper answers that are connected. The Assyrians are involved, right? There's going to be Assyrian blood in here. I can remember that much because it's kind of part of what happened to Egypt as well, right? Because of the flip side on that Exodus story with the Akhenaten situation, the Setians. And, you know, you make a deliberate choice to establish that Set is your primary god. You make a deliberate choice to do these things. And then the joke is that you tell people that, oh no, we're not going to do the horrible things that Set did. Those are just stories. But then, lo and behold, the mythology starts to fucking play out. So, sorry, man. Like, I get it. There was a time where you had to lie to a whole bunch of bigots. But now it's time to fucking put up or shut up, because you might be committing satanic ritual abuse. And you can have whatever religion, whatever magical order you want. You do not affiliate with crime. You can't turn a crime into something you ritually do. That you can't do. You're just going to have to get a goat like everyone else. Of course, you have kept it perfectly pure for God, and the holy place remains unpolluted. You have never dishonored your hoped-for ally. He still receives the customary sacrifice. If anyone robbed you of your daily food, you godless creature, you would regard him as your enemy. And do you think you can count on God, whom you have denied his everlasting worship, to be your ally in the war? Right. No, just remember, this is just stormtrooper shit, right? Like, you know, it's just, like, this is how Empire works. The army is also the local security, and they have a license to kill. Right? This is why I always sided with the left on the demilitarization of the police. Police uniforms went from like a powder blue, navy blue, to tactical black after 9/11. tactical black, the intimidating enforcer uniforms that we see now, with the light Kevlar, and these guys are we're supposed to have a Second Amendment right, and sure, I don't need to be on the killdozer, right? I don't need to run around with absurd weaponry. I do deserve to have absurd weaponry that I responsibly use under responsible context, like safety ranges and things of this nature. But as far as small and medium arms are concerned, yeah. Because I want my rights intact, because if you want me to not resist arrest, you better be able to talk to me as a civil human being. And I can just keep my gun holstered like I ought to be able to do and have a great conversation with a man who I am hoping is in honor of what we would like to agree in the public forum is the purpose of you as someone who is a peace officer. There's huge distinctions that exist out of the service of massive populations. So, this is all stormtrooper shit. Of course, you have kept it perfectly pure for God, and the holy place remains unpolluted. You have never dishonored your hoped-for ally. He still receives the customary sacrifices. If anyone robbed you of your daily food, you godless creature, you would regard him as your enemy. And do you think you can count on God, whom you have denied his everlasting worship, to be your ally in the war, and to do you blame your own sins on the Romans? So what this guy is basically saying is that this happens to be part of a godless demographic of Jews, that an enormous chunk of their city is like hard leftist types, right? Yeah, this is one of the fucking reasons why I want to read this book right now. It's just like you're looking at this, and the thing is, I don't know if they're leftists. They may be private enterprise type people, right? The problem is that they might be actually hardcore rightists who rejected God and then do this, right? I'm told that Nazi Germany was not like a bunch of pseudo Germanic Christians, like North Sea Christian-y type. It's just the people that made up all those soldier types. By that point, it was just state religion. There's not a lot of literature about God coming out of the minds of the Reich culture, right? There was something wrong. There was something wrong there, man, right? And so perhaps that's what all this is. Either way, they didn't seem to be a people that were interested in being properly armed, right? We're talking about people that fight like hobbits with fucking pots and goddamn pans. So, who have throughout respected our laws. Hold on a second. Okay, and do you blame your own sins on the Romans, who have throughout respected our law and are now pressing you to restore to God the sacrifices you have interrupted? Who would not groan with anguish at the astounding change that has come over the city, when foreigners and enemies atone for your ungodliness, and you, a Jew, cradled in the law, do more hurt than they? But consider John To turn your back on evil ways is no disgrace, even at the last moment. Right? What this really is, it's not exactly what's going on now. It's what happened at the deterioration of the autonomous zone. Right? That little downtown square inch of Seattle that the leftists turned into a playpen to demonstrate what they wanted to do to the whole fucking world. And how it went down just as poorly as you think it did. It's one of the craziest things. This is more like the autonomous zone. Except they parked the autonomous zone in front of the temple. So, if you wish to save your birthplace, you have a splendid example before you in Jeconiah, king of the Jews. He, when the king of Babylon made war on him through his own fault, of his own accord, left the city before its capture, and with his family submitted to voluntary imprisonment rather than surrender these holy places to the enemy and see the house of God go up in flames. For that he is celebrated by all Jews in the sacred record and memory, flowing through the ages eternally new, passes him on to future generations immortal. A splendid example, John, even if it were dangerous. But I can guarantee your pardon from the Romans. Remember, this is the advice of a fellow countryman and the promise of a Jew. It is sensible to consider who is counseling you and where he comes from. You know, am I allowed to say, you know, the promise of a Norman? Right? Can I say that? Does that, you know, it's You're a Roman, man. You're a Roman. You're not legally Jewish anymore. You're only everything else Jewish, which counts more, yes. But your circumstances are your choice at the same time. You're choosing to be in that position. You're not making an effort to take yourself out of that position. So, it depends on how a man who's making not as big a sacrifice, how that falls on their ears. Right? It's just like they're having a conversation with themselves every day within, you know, their rationalizations for why tomorrow's oblivion is better than tomorrow's, I don't know, slavery, I suppose. And then they got this guy who is making assumptions about the conversation they had this week. Anyway, if you wish to save your birthplace, you have a splendid example before you in Jeconiah. I'm sorry, I read that already. Voluntary, eternally new. Hold on a second. I went pretty far down, didn't I? Wait. Yeah, generation, a splendid example. Remember the advice of fellow countrymen. Yes, it is sensible to consider who is counseling you and where he comes from. I trust that never while I live shall I become such an abject slave as to deny my birth or forget my heritage. Once more you rage against me with loud-mouthed abuse. I deserve even worse for flying in the face of fate to advise you and fighting to save men damned by God. Who doesn't know the writing of the old prophets and the oracle pronounced against this unhappy city now about to be fulfilled? They foretold the day of her fall, the day when some man began the slaughter of his fellow countrymen, and aren't the city and temple full of your dead bodies? It is God then, God himself, who is bringing with the Romans fire to purge the temple and is blotting out the city, brimful of corruption, as if it had never been. You see, I can imagine the Roman corruption that would come out of this war. Imagine survivors of this war who, because many of them were probably literate and keen to writing some things, not tremendous amount, but enough to do business in the kingdom. Imagine, these guys integrating into society and then subverting its values and putting into that empire the values that they wanted to have in their kingdom. And then you begin to see the vicious cycle. If those outline of facts are true. As Josephus spoke thus with groaning and tears, sobs choked his voice. Even the Romans were moved by his distress and applauded his determination. But John's party were the more incensed with the Romans and mad to get Josephus into their clutches. However, many citizens of good families were shaken by his speech. Some of them were too frightened of the partisan guards to move through. They had given up themselves in the city for lost, but a few watched their opportunity to escape and sought asylum with the Romans. These included the chief priests, Joseph and Jeshua, and several sons of chief priests, 3 sons of Ishmael, who had been beheaded in Cyrene, 4 of Matthias, and 1 of another Matthias. This man had run away after the death of his father, who had been murdered by Simon, son of Gaius, with 3 sons, as explained above. Many other citizens of good family went over with the chief priests. Caesar received them with all possible kindness, and knowing that foreign customs would make life distasteful for them, he sent them to Gophna, where he advised them to remain for the time being. He would restore every man's possessions as soon as he had got the war off his hands. So they retired to the little town allotted to them in perfect safety and supremely content. When they did not appear, the partisans again spread the tale that the Romans had butchered the deserters, obviously in the hope that the rest would be too frightened to run away. As before, the trick worked for a time. Terror effectively put a stop to desertions, but when the men were brought back from Gophna by Titus in order to go round the wall with Josephus under the eyes of the people, there was a wholesale flight to the Romans. All the fugitives joined together, and standing in front of the Roman lines, wept and wailed as they besought the partisans, if they could bring themselves to do it, to fling their gates wide open to the Romans, if not at least to withdraw from the temple and save their treasured sanctuary. The Romans would never bring themselves, unless absolutely driven to it, to burn down the sacred buildings. This appeal provoked a violent reaction. A volley of abuse was hurled at the deserters. And above the sacred gates, quick loaders, catapults, and stone throwers were set in line, so that the temple courts, littered with bodies, were like a vast graveyard, the sanctuary itself like a fortress into the sacred, untrodden precincts. They poured armed to the teeth, their hands still dripping with the blood of their countrymen. So monstrous was their conduct that the indignation of the Jews might well have felt if the Romans had committed such outrages against them, was felt by the Romans now against the Jews who profaned their own holy ground. Right? So like at this point, the Romans are actually trying to liberate the city. It's like they're not interested in destroying this temple, it would seem, right? The idea is, all right, look, there's a lot of things we want in conquest of you Jews. We actually don't want to destroy your temple and stop your worship practices, but they're dealing with these last guys who do. They want to see this temple destroyed, but it's not for the right reasons, right? Because that's something else that's going on here. But then that goes off into things you have to understand in the Magi Grail Shaman mythos over on Black Earth Productions. That's the Temple of the White Dragon teachings, which are going to coincide with work from many other people in Network on the background of Jewish history before and after the events alleged in this book. Okay. Stone throwers were his own countrymen. So monstrous was the conduct that the indignation the Jews might well have felt if the Romans had committed such outrages against them was felt by the Romans now against the Jews who profaned their own holy ground. In fact, among the soldiers, there was not a man who was not filled with reverent awe when his eyes rested on the sanctuary, or who did not pray that the terrorists would see light before all was lost. Greatly distressed, Titus again reproached John and his supporters. You disgusting people, didn't you put up that balustrade to guard your holy house? Didn't you, at intervals along it, place slabs inscribed in Greek characters and our own, forbidding anyone to go beyond the parapet? And didn't we give you leave to execute anyone who did go beyond it, even if he was a Roman? Why then, you guilty men, are you now trampling dead bodies inside it? Why are you polluting your sanctuary with the blood of foreigner and native? I call the gods of my fathers, and any god that ever watched over this place. I do not believe there is one now. I call my own army, the Jews in my camp, and you yourselves to witness that I am not compelling you to desecrate your temple. If you change the battleground, no Roman shall go near your holy place or insult them. I will protect the sanctuary for you whether you wish it or not. So he's saying this is a win-win for the temple. Whose fucking side are you on? That's his argument. I like that. I'm an Aries. I like the direct approach. And so what I find crazy is that he invokes like all manner of gods, right? He's saying like there's something that is universally significant that needs to be preserved here, right? This is the way, like, it's just like, I may hate all sorts of things about the existence of the Holy See and the Vatican and Rome and as entities and these horrible peoples. But let's keep the structures up because they are incredible engineering achievements. They're incredible aesthetic achievements. Hey, how's it going, Tim? Excuse me. As Josephus made known this promise on Caesar's behalf, the terrorists and their chief, assuming that not good will, but cowardice lay behind his exhortations, received them with scorn. Right? So here's my point, right? There would have been the influence of the high rabbis into something in the substructure of the Roman Empire by this point, right? Especially if you've got Jews who are doing business with the military or are interested in joining the military for some reason. So anyway, as Josephus made known this promise on Caesar's behalf, the terrorists and their chief, assuming that not goodwill but cowardice lay behind his exhortations, received them with scorn. When Titus saw that these men had no mercy on themselves and no concern for the sanctuary, he resumed hostilities. Though much against his will. It was not possible to bring up his whole army against them, as there was not enough room. So he picked out from every century the 30 best soldiers and put a tribune in charge of every 1,000, the entire force being under the command of Cerilath, with orders to attack the guard posts an hour before sunrise. He was himself in arms and ready to go down with them, but his friends held him back because the danger was so great and because the officers insisted that he would do more good by sitting quiet in Antonia in general control of the operations of his men than by going down into the forefront of the battle. If Caesar was watching, every man would fight to the death. Yielding to their arguments, Caesar explained to the men that he was staying behind for one purpose only, to be judge of their exploits, so that no brave man should go unrewarded, no reward unpunished, though not being seen, and to be an eyewitness of every deed, able as he was both to punish and to reward. So he sent them to their task at the time mentioned above, and going himself to an excellent forward observation post, he remained in Antonia anxiously awaiting the outcome. However, the task force did not find the guards asleep, as they hoped. They leapt to their feet with loud yells, and a hand-to-hand struggle instantly began. When the shout of the sentries was heard within, the rest of the guard poured out in a body. Under the onslaught of the leading ranks, the Romans stood firm. Those who followed collided with their own troops, and many treated friends as foes. They could not distinguish voices because of the confused hubbub, nor faces because it was night. They were blinded also, some by fury, some by fear. Consequently, they struck out indiscriminately at all in their path. The Romans locked their shields together and charged in their units, so suffering less from the bewilderment, and every man remembered the password. The Jews were continually scattering. Their attacks and retreats were haphazard, and they repeatedly took each other for enemies. In the darkness, any man who moved to the rear was invariably received by his friends as an advancing Roman. In fact, more were wounded by their comrades than by the enemy, till day broke and it was possible to see what was happening in the battle. The two sides now separated into opposing formations and began to hurl missiles in an orderly engagement. Neither side gave an inch of or showed any sign of wariness. The Romans, as Caesar was watching individually and by companies, vied with each other. Every man conceived that his promotion would date from that day if he distinguished himself in the fight. The Jews had as judge of their prowess their fear for themselves and for the temple and the taskmaster who stood over them, rousing them to action, some with encouragement, some with threats or the lash. In the main, the battle was stationary, the ebb and flow very slight and very rapid. Flight and pursuit were alike impossible. All the time the shouts from Antonia changed with the fortunes of their own men. At every advance, they were loudly cheered. At every retreat, they were urged to stand fast. It was like a battle in an amphitheater. Titus and his staff could see every detail of the fighting. At last, after battling from before dawn to nearly midday, they broke off the fight without either side having really budged the other from the spot where the first blow was struck, and without any decision being reached. On the Roman side, many had fought magnificently. On the Jewish, of Simon's followers, Judas's son or Merto, and Simon son of Josiah, of the Edomian Jacob and Simon, sons of Solsas and Cathla respectively, of John's men, Clytheus and Alexis, and of the Zealots, Simon son of Jairus. So one of the Zealots is spoken of here too. Okay, you're on catch-up at part 6. All right, Timmy. All right. Meanwhile, hold on one second. Let me... Because I started reading at 31, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's right. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, that's perfect. All right, we're going to take another break. With, Never Believe. Good spot. Excellent, excellent. So, from here on, we should be in the last stretch of the book. Should be about 5.5 pages to go. Shoot. Meanwhile, let me make sure I can see. Oops, no, not that. Sorry, guys. There we go. Meanwhile, the rest of the Roman army had, in 1 week, laid Antonia flat and engineered a wide road to the temple. Advancing near to the first rampart, the legions now set to work on 4 platforms. One opposite the northwest corner of the inner temple, one near the northern arcade between the 2 grates, and the other 2, one opposite the western colonnade of the outer temple, the other further out opposite the northern. The progress of the work, however, costs them much toil and sweat, as they had to fetch the timber 11 or 12 miles. Sometimes they suffered losses through Jewish stratagems, as their crushing superiority made them overconfident, just when despair of survival made the Jews more daring than ever. For instance, some of the mounted men, every time they went out to collect firewood or fodder, used while they were foraging to their horses graze, free and unbridled, these the Jews, by a sudden sortie in strength, seize and carried off. This happened so often that Caesar, correctly diagnosing the cause of these losses as less the valor of the Jews than the negligence of his own soldiers, decided to make measures to ensure better care of the horses in the future. He commanded one of the men who had lost their mounts to be led off for execution, so terrifying the rest that he made sure their horses should be safe. They never again left them behind to graze, but took them on all their forays as if horse and rider were one. So the war against the temple continued, and the platform neared completion. The very day after the ascent of the legions, many of the partisans of the supply of loot was running out and hunger was pressing, made a united attack on the Roman posts on the Mount of Olives an hour before sunset, hoping they would catch them off their guard and already busy with their personal needs, and so force their way through without difficulty. Like, something that's interesting in context, right? People, like, we don't know this story because, I guess the verification of the story can't be found, and so it's easier with the new assumptions of history to have a much more ambiguous understanding of things that went on, right? But here you're getting context of Jesus died in this city, right? This is where he was crucified sometime after, like, the death of Herod or something, right? Or Herod just didn't know that this guy was the guy. So, they go through this whole thing and they get him crucified. Right? So, this is designed to kind of framework the consequences of the people who listened to the Pharisees. Right? which gets into the whole conspiracy behind the staging of Jesus. Jesus was effectively a Roman stage play, taking this whole solar worship thing and trying to find a Jewish palatable function of bringing the people of Israel into the Roman fold. That's what I think is the reality, which is why I'm much more interested in the evocation of the Christos title after it has properly been understood in context. Now then. Oh, I forgot to turn... Did I forget to turn the thing on? What am I doing here? I did. Yield page is not on the screen. I just... Thank you. Thank you. You said it cute, so I didn't catch it right away because, you know, I'm being cute over here. Anyway, but the Romans saw them coming and instantly closing in from the neighboring guard posts, prevented them from climbing over the camp wall or cutting through it by force. Followed a fierce struggle with many instances of heroic courage on both sides. The Romans showing a combination of strength and tactical skill, the Jews unlimited vigor and uncontrollable fury. Shame was in command of one side, necessity of the other. To let the Jews slip out of the net that enveloped them seemed to the Romans an appalling disgrace. Their opponents had one solitary hope of survival, to break through the wall by sheer force. A mounted man from one cohort by name, Pedanius, seeing the Jews at last, rooted and pushed down into the valley, drove his horse alongside at a furious pace and snatched up one of the enemy as he fled, a young man of sturdy build and in full armor too, seizing him by the ankle. So far did he lean over from the saddle, so magnificently did he display strength of hand and body combined. With magnificent horsemanship, then, as if he had got the hold of a treasure, he rode off with his prisoner to Caesar. Titus congratulated the captor of his amazing strength and ordered the captive to be executed for his part in the attempt on the wall. Then turned his personal attention to the battle for the temple and the speedier construction of the platforms. The Jews were suffering so severely in every engagement as the war slowly but surely approached its culmination and crept nearer to the sanctuary that they severed as from a diseased body the affected limbs to prevent the spread of the infection. The part of the northwest colonnade that was joined to Antonia they set on fire, afterwards breaking off some 30 feet with their own hands, beginning the burning down of their holy places. Two days later, on the 24th of the last month, the adjoining colonnade was fired by the Romans. When the flames had advanced over 20 feet, the Jews, as before, cut away the roof, and showing no regard whatever for this masterpiece of architecture, severed the link it provided with Antonia. With this in mind, though they had a chance to stop the lighting of the fire, they did not even lift a finger as the flames approached, and regarded the progress of the fire in the light of their own advantage. Around the temple there was no break in the fighting, battle raging continuously between small raiding parties of both sides. During this period, one of the Jews called Jonathan a man of small stature and nothing much to look at, whose birth and attainments were negligible, stepped forward opposite the tomb of John the high priest, heaped contempt and abuse on the heads of the Romans, and challenged the bravest of them to single combat. Of the Romans lined up at that point, the majority treated him with contempt. Some, in all probability, were frightened. A few were struck by the very reasonable thought that a man who was looking for death was not one to be engaged at close quarters. Those who despaired of their lives might well have uncontrollable passions and the willing help of the Almighty, and to risk everything in a duel with one whose defeat would be nothing to boast of, his victory disgraceful as well as dangerous, was an act not of courage, but of recklessness. For on a long night no one came forward, and the Jew hurled a volley of gibes at their cowardice, for he had a great admiration for himself and contempt for the Romans. But at last one Pudens, a member of the cavalry, sickened by his arrogant vaporings, and no doubt foolishly overconfident because of his small stature, ran out, joined the battle, and was getting the better of it when fortune left him in the lurch. He fell, and Jonathan ran up and dispatched him. Then, standing on the body, he brandished his dripping sword, and with his left hand waved his shield, shouting vociferously at the troops, crowing over the fallen man, mocking the Romans as they watched. At length, while he still jumped about and played the fool, Priscus, a centurion, shot an arrow which pierced him through. At this shout went up from Jews and Romans, very different in character. Man, it's just like, somebody just should have arrowed him before homie decided to go into honor combat. Could somebody just fucking axe this motherfucker, right? Like, that should have happened first. Jonathan, spinning round in his agony, fell down on the body of his foe. Clear proof that in war, undeserved success instantly brings on itself the vengeance of heaven. Partisans in the temple never slackened their own endeavors to cause daily losses to the soldiers working on the platforms, and on the 27th of the same month they devised the following ruse. In the western colonnade they filled the space between the joists and the ceiling below them with dry wood, bitumen and pitch, then withdrew as if tired out. Thereupon many thoughtless soldiers, carried away by reckless eagerness, charged after those retreating, and erecting ladders ran up to the colonnade. The more sensible men, suspicious of the unexplained Jewish withdrawal, made no move. However, the colonnade was crowded with the men who had climbed onto it, and at that moment the Jews fired it from end to end. As the flames shot up suddenly all around, the Romans, who were out of danger, were seized with utter consternation. The trapped men with complete helplessness. Unbelievable. Encircled by the blaze, some flung themselves down into the city behind them, some into the thick of the foe. Many, in the hope of escaping with their lives, jumped down among their own men and broke their legs. Most, for all their haste, were too slow for the fire. A few cheated the flames with their own daggers. Even those destined for a different end were promptly trapped by the wide extension of the conflagration. Caesar, though angry with the victims for having climbed onto the colonnade without orders, was at the same time moved with human compassion, and though no one could hope to rescue them, it was some comfort to the dying men to see the one for whom they were giving their lives so distressed. For as he called out to them and dashed forward and urged those around him to do everything possible to help them, he could be seen by all, taking with him those shouts, that sympathy, like a glorious winding sheet, every man died happy. Some indeed retired to the wide colonnade wall and got clear of the fire. But they were trapped by the Jews, and after long holding out in spite of their many wounds, finally perished to a man. So that's kind of interesting. So Caesar, spared them a horrible death by making sure that they knew that he was watching them die, in which case, they went into, it's all right. He sees how hard we fought. It's like one of those kinds of things. So it's just it's good, men. It's a very to Valhalla. This is, how the pagan Roman went to Valhalla kind of situation, right? So there's a lot of showmanship for the emperor himself. This is very similar to the showmanship given to the popes, right? There's always somebody from some country doing some stupid animal trick, and the Pope is just oh, yes, your village is such amazing children of God, right? It's that pomp and circumstance. Last to fall was a young man named Longinus, who added glory to the whole tragic tale, and when everyone of all the men who died deserved to be mentioned outshone them all, full of admiration for his prowess and in any case unable to get at him, the Jews invited him to come down to them under a pledge of safety. His brother Cornelius, on the other hand, adjured him not to tarnish his own renown and disgrace the Roman army. I want to... Can Mel Gibson do a movie of this book? Mel Gibson should do a Josephus, trilogy or something. This would be a wild, wild Mel Gibson movie. This would be The Passion, meets, all sorts of stuff. It's theoretically already a sequel to The Passion, right? It's already you can just make a sequel to The Passion out of this book. Convinced that he was right, Longinus held up his sword in the sight of the opposing lines and plunged it in his heart. Among those trapped by the flames, one Artorius saved his life by a trick. He called to him a fellow soldier, Lucius, who shared his tent and yelled, "I will leave you everything I have if you will come close and catch me." Lucius eagerly ran to his aid. Then Artorius jumped on top of him and survived, but his weight dashed his rescuer to the stone pavement, killing him instantly. So this guy named Lucius then Artorius jumped on top of him and survived, but his weight killing him. So Lucius was killed instantly by Artorius, who jumped on him and broke his fall by breaking him. That sucks. That really sucks. Because both of them could have survived if the other just knew how to catch, or he gave him a moment to catch. Probably could have worked. For a time, this terrible blow filled the Romans with despondency, but it helped them in the long run by making them more wary and putting them on their guard against Jewish traps, in which they suffered chiefly through ignorance of the ground and through the character of their opponents. The colonnade was burnt down as far as the tower which John, in his struggle with Simon, had built over the gates opening on to the gymnasium. The rest, now that the men who had climbed onto it had been wiped out, the Jews cut away. The next day, the Romans took a turn, setting light to the entire northern colonnade as far as its junction with the eastern, where the angle between the two overhung the Kidron Valley, to which there was a terrifying drop. Here, for the present, we leave the struggle for the temple. You know, I'm thinking to myself from the prior chapter when he's going through all the explanations of the description of the temple, I don't think he mentioned anything about the crack in the temple. Right? Because, like, there was the whole bit that when Jesus either died or was resurrected, the temple cracked, right? This would be the temple in question. So he didn't mention that, I don't think. I don't recall hearing them say those words while I was reading them, but some of this reading is in flow state, and I'm picking up what I got to talk about. In the city, famine raged, its victims dropping dead in countless numbers, and the horrors were unspeakable. I thought they were also starving this unspeakable, the battle prior and the battle prior to that. This is like third level of starvation again, right? It's kind of weird when you think about it. In every home, if the shadow of something to eat was anywhere detected, war broke out, and the best of friends came to grips with each other, snatching away the wretchedest means of support. Not even the dying were believed to be in want. At their last gasp, they were searched by the bandits in case some of them had food inside their clothes and were feigning death. Open-mouthed with hunger like mad dogs, the desperadoes stumbled and staggered along, hammering at the doors like drunken men, and in their helpless state, breaking into the same houses 2 or 3 times in a single hour. Yeah, you're like they're completely operating in the reptilian brain at this point. Like this is absolute baseline reptilian consciousness. You are all in the abuse activated fucking root chakra in this parlance. The necessity made them put their teeth in everything. Things not even the filthiest of dumb animals would look at, they picked up and brought themselves to swallow. I can imagine in the city. In the end, they actually devoured belts and shoes and stripped off the leather from their shields and chewed it. None of these people knew a goddamn thing about fasting. Ain't that funny? This is what happens when you don't live under any particular discipline. You don't give yourself any discipline. You've got no disciplinary backup to deal with this. They still have enough energy to do this and to fight. Like, I'm sure they're not fighting like full. They're probably like 2 skeletons beating each other up. You know what I mean? But like, this is madness. So, for there were people who collected the stalks and sold a tiny bunch for 4 Attic drachmas. But why should I speak of the inanimate things that hunger made them, shameless enough to eat? I am going now to relate a deed for which there is no parallel in the annals of Greece or any other country. A deed horrible to speak of and incredible to hear. For myself, I am so anxious that future ages should not suspect me of grotesque inventions that I would gladly have passed over the calamity in silence, had there not been countless witnesses of my own generation to bear me out. And besides, my country would have little reason to thank me if I drew a veil over the miseries that were so real to her. We are about to hear some horrible, heinous shit to land this fucking plane. This sounds pretty fucking serious, pretty fucking real, pretty fucking grade A horror show. Let's see what we have in store for us. And of course, this chick's name is Mary. There was a woman, Mary the daughter Eleazar, who lived east of Jordan in the village of Bethzeb, house of Hyssop. She was of good family and very rich, and had fled with the rest of the population to Jerusalem, where she shared in the horrors of the siege. Most of the property she had packed up and moved from Perea into the city had been plundered by the party chiefs. The remnants of her treasures and any food she had managed to obtain were being carried off in daily raids by their henchmen. The wretched women was filled with uncontrollable fury, and let loose a stream of abuse and curses that enraged the looters against her. When neither resentment nor pity caused anyone to kill her, and she grew tired of finding food for others, and whichever way she turned it was almost impossible to find, and while hunger was eating her heart out and rage was consuming her still faster, she yielded to the suggestions of fury and necessity, and in defiance of all natural feeling laid hands on her own child, a babe at the breast. "Poor little mite," she cried. "In war, famine, and civil strife, why should I keep you alive?" Here we go. With the Romans, there is only slavery, even if we are alive when they come. But famine is forestalling slavery, and the partisans are crueler than either. Right? So, is she wrong? Are things about to put them in various kinds of slavery? Right? Was slavery for all Jews or only some Jews? And was slavery not a fucking life sentence because perhaps it was possible to work your way up to, I don't know, something that isn't slave but not citizen within society, per se? If it works that way, if you have an idea what I'm saying. But anyway, "Come, you must be food for me, to the partisans an avenging spirit, and to the world a tale, the only thing left to fill up the measure of Jewish misery." So here we go. She's going to literally eat her own. As she spoke, she killed her son, then roasted him and ate one half, concealing and saving up the rest. At once the partisans appeared. At once the partisans appeared, and sniffing the unholy smell, threatened that if she did not produce what she had prepared, they would kill her on the spot. She replied that she had kept a fine helping for them, and uncovered what was left of her child. They, overcome with instant horror and amazement, could not take their eyes off the sight, but she went on. "This child is my own, and the deed is mine too. Help yourselves. I've had my share. Don't be softer than a woman, or more tender-hearted than a mother. But if you are squeamish and don't approve of my sacrifice, well, I have eaten half, so you may as well leave me the rest." That was the last straw, and they went away quivering. They had never before shrunk from anything, and did not much like giving up even this food to the mother. From the moment the entire city could think of nothing else but this abomination, everyone saw the tragedy before his own eyes and shuddered as if the crime was his. The one desire of the starving was for death. Now they envied those who had gone before seeing or hearing of these appalling horrors. It was not long before the dreadful news reached the Romans. Some of them refused to believe. Some were distressed. On most, the effect was to add enormously to their detestation of the Jewish race. Right? It's like these guys are just really weird. They're just really weird in how they get to this point. Like, it's not that I disagree that these people are committing a detestable act, But I mean, like, this is the first time? Like, only the Jews in all of civilization have a mindset that brings a person to this. And what side of the Jews was she actually on, being one stuck in all of this? Well, is this only the women that were all for the radicals? And this is events happening here in this city. This is not... What about the Jews in every other city in this fucking book that didn't end up in exactly this situation? And you know that you've starved a few there. This is a manifestation of a flaw in your ontology. And she is fucking vomiting it out of the unconscious. Right? This is a, you know, this is a dark archetype of the unconscious within whatever goes on with this civilization, if Josephus isn't lying about this. Caesar disclaimed all responsibility in the sight of God for his latest tragedy. He had offered the Jews peace and self-government with an amnesty for all offenders, but they had rejected concord in favor of strife, peace in favor of war, plenty and abundance in favor of hunger, and with their own hands had tried to burn down the temple which the Romans were safeguarding on their behalf. So this food was just what they deserved. Nevertheless, he would bury this abomination of infanticide and cannibalism under the ruins of their country, and would not leave in the wide world under the sun a city in which mothers fed themselves thus. It was even more revolting for mothers to eat such food than for fathers, who even after such appalling tragedies remained in arms. While he made this clear, he was thinking too of the desperation of these men. They would never see reason. After enduring all the agonies they might so easily have avoided by a change of heart. The temple burnt and the city taken. I wonder if that's going to be worse or better. Did we just hit the worst and then it'll be ugly but better at the end? Like, how's the next chapter going to end? Sounds crazy. Crazy. Got about 57 pages left to the book proper. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Lucy and Tim Timoney, for your contribution. And Nitwit was lurking somewhere during the show, and I'm sure we'll catch all of it. She's one of the people on the study with me. Thank you. All right, guys. I will catch you soon. I'll probably bang another one of these out over the weekend, at least, maybe two. We'll find out what's up.